Howdy folks, this is part 2 of my 2 videos on equations of a circle, and in this part these are going to be the later problems on your worksheet, and on these, depending on what information you're given, the idea is to come up with the equation of the circle. Don't forget that the equation of a circle always fits this format where we have x minus a, that quantity squared, plus y minus b, that quantity squared, equals the radius squared. And remember, the opposite of this a value here is the x value of our center, and the opposite of this b value is the y value of our center point. And of course, r stands for radius. So some of the problems on this worksheet that you're going to do for homework involve just giving you then the center and the radius. You know, something as simple as a problem like this, where let's say the center of our circle is at the coordinates 4, 9, and our radius is given as being 7. So we fill into the formula and come up with our equation. So these are as simple as this. We put in the opposite of positive 4, which would be a negative 4 for our x value, or I should say our a value. And the b value here is the opposite of this y value, so instead of positive 9, we'd have a negative 9. Don't forget the plus in between here. Remember, in my first part of the video, I said that this is really just a Pythagorean theorem that we're doing here. Before I continue that thought, let me finish this. 7 is our radius, so here you'd have 7 squared, or that's just, of course, 49. So there's our final answer. Okay, and just real quick, just to show you why the Pythagorean theorem is really the basis of these equations, I just want to show you something. You know, say here's our circle, and there's the center of our circle. Okay, and this is basically the Pythagorean theorem: a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if I were to draw a radius, for example, to this point out here, excuse me. Okay, now if I were to drop this down and over at a right angle, there's the right triangle that is the basis of your equation of your circle. The radius was this part here. Notice that's the hypotenuse, so that's the c squared part over here. And then each of these are the x minus a and y minus b parts. You know, these are your x values running side to side, so this would be the x minus a part, and then this right here would be the y minus b part. So they square each of those and set it equal to the square of the radius. Okay, but no matter what point you pick on a circle, when you draw that radius and then drop a vertical line and a horizontal line, you can make it into a right triangle, and that's really the basis behind these equations. Okay, so again, just to do one more of those to show you how easy these first ones are. Let's say I give you this time a center point at negative 12, 9. Those are the coordinates of the center, and a radius of 5. Okay, so the opposite of negative 12 would be positive 12, so I'm going to put a plus 12 inside here with the x. Okay, the opposite of the y value would be a negative 9, so y minus 9 goes inside here. Don't forget this plus, and over here we square the radius. 5 times 5 is 25. So there would be the equation of this circle right here. Okay, so it's pretty easy if they just give you the center and the radius. Okay, now the problems are going to get a bit more difficult though. One of the ways that they can make it a little more difficult is if they give you the center and then a point on the circle. So let's say our center point is at -3, -8. A point on the circle was given as being, let's say, -9, -3. All right, so we've got the center point, and we have a point, somewhere out here on the circle. Now, keep in mind, if you connect the two of those, that makes a radius. Okay, so if I know that this center point here is at -3, -8, and the point on the circle is at -9, -3, which this isn't an accurate picture, but you get the idea. Those are going to be the endpoints of a radius. So if I need the center and the radius to write the equation, I need to find this radius yet. Okay, so of course we're going to find that radius by using the distance formula. You got to find out how far it is from the center point out here to the edge of the circle. Okay, the distance formula, as you know, has it's one big formula here with a square root. So it's the square root of, and then the quantity x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared, and all of that square rooted. Our calculators do have a formula, or a program, sorry, that'll do distance for you. But on these problems, I highly recommend actually that you do these by hand and that you don't use that program, because that program is designed to give you a rounded decimal for the radius in the end, and you do not want any rounded decimals here. In fact, in the end, what I really want is r squared. Okay, so in the end, if I want to know r squared, if I square this side, I'd be squaring this one as well, and what it's going to do is get rid of the whole square root part. So really what we want to know is, we want to know this value underneath the square root right there. Because if I square this side and I square this side, the square root would be gone. So we're really going to need to know this underneath here. Now for right now, I'm just going to go ahead and start calculating this inside here with the square root around it. Okay, your first x value, you could say, was -3 minus the other x value, -9. And don't forget to square that, plus first y value, -8, minus the second y value, -3 squared. Okay, this creates a double negative, so that becomes plus positive. 9 plus -3 is 6. 6 squared is 36. Okay. Over here, same thing, double negative becomes plus positive. -8 plus 3 would be -5. -5, when you square that, becomes positive 25. 25 plus the 36 then gets me up to 61. So in the end, the radius is going to be the square root of 61. But remember, over here, when I go to plug it into the equation, I'm going to square that radius. So I'm not going to bother to figure out what this decimal is. Square root of 61 would be some decimal. But if I turn around and square a square root, all they do is cancel each other out, and that leaves me with 61 for this part right there. Again, all I'm doing is this. I'm squaring the radius, so I have to square this side as well. So that means r squared is going to equal, and then these cancel each other out. Square root and square. Square root and square cancel each other out, leaving you just with what was underneath the square root all along, see? That's 61. So that's r squared. And then don't forget to plug back in for your center point the opposite of your x value and the opposite of your y value. So the opposite of -3 would be a +3, and square that, plus y plus 8. Opposite of -8 would be a +8 squared. So there's my final answer. There's the equation of the circle. Quantity x plus 3 squared plus the quantity y plus 8 squared equals 61. So on a problem like this, if they give you the center point and a point on the circle, if you look at our visual over here, those 2 points would be the ends of a radius. So don't forget, you got to find the distance from each point to the other to get that radius, and then square that radius when you plug it in over here. Okay, another possibility, instead of giving you a point on the circle in the center, is if they give you the ends of the diameter itself. Okay, so in this problem, this next type of problem, I'm not giving you the center. Okay, we're going to give you the ends of a diameter. Ends of a diameter. So one end of the diameter, let's say, is at the coordinates 10, 5. And then they give you the other end of the diameter as well. Let's say that's at -2, 11. So again, if you want a visual of what's going on here, if this is our circle, we've got a diameter. Okay, and remember, a diameter does go through the center of the circle. Okay, but we have a diameter of the circle given where one of them has the coordinates 10, 5. And the other point -2, 11. Okay, so again, don't forget, to be able to write our equation, we need 2 things. We need the center of the circle and the radius. Okay, so we're going to have to find both of those in this case, because neither of those were given to us. So let's start with the center. Okay, the center, remember here, is, for a diameter at least, is going to be in the dead center middle of the diameter. Okay, so what we're really going to be doing here to find our center point is we're going to be locating the midpoint of this diameter. Okay, so we're going to follow that midpoint formula. If you remember right, it looks like this. You take your x values, you average them, you add them and divide by 2. And that's your new x value. Okay, you do the same with the y values. So y1, y2, we're going to add them and divide by 2 as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. -2 is one of my x values. 10 is the other one. We're going to add them and divide by 2. And that'll be our new x value. Okay, we're going to do the same with the y's. The 11, the 5, we're going to take those 2, add them, and divide by 2. All right, 10 plus -2 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 11 plus 5 is 16. Divided by 2 is 8. Okay, so the center point on this one is located at 4, 8. Okay, I'm going to write that up here. Okay, because I need to make some room again here to do some more work. Okay, but remember, that's all we did was find the midpoint of the diameter to locate where the center would be using this formula. Okay, now I've got a center point and technically a couple of points that are on the circle. I know this center now is located at 4, 8, and I do have a couple of points that are on the circle. So now it's just like the previous problems we just did. Which, yeah, I'll go ahead and erase that. I can erase this too now. I've got everything over there. There's the ends of the diameter, there's the center. Okay, and again, don't forget then that half of that diameter is a radius. So now that I know where the center point is, I can do the distance formula again to help me find the radius. So radius is going to be equal to the distance formula, x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. Okay, start to figure out all that stuff underneath the square root. So remember, in the end, really that's all that I'm concerned with, because r squared is going to be equivalent to what's underneath there. Alright, so let's use 4/8, and now you get to pick for the other point, the second point, because this is a radius, but keep in mind if I go this way over here, that's a radius as well. So either use the center in this point or the center in that point. Now if you're wondering which one would I choose, I like to avoid negatives. I like to choose as many positive values as possible. So I'm going to go with the 10/5 and the 4/8 to find my radius. But you could just use the center 4/8 in this point as well. It'll work either way. Don't get me wrong. I'm just picking 10/5, like I said, because it has more positive values. Okay, so when I go to plug in, I'm going to call that my x1 4 minus the x2 10 squared plus y1 would be 8 minus the y2 value of 5. 4 minus 10 is -6, but a negative, as soon as you square it, it's going to become a positive. So -6 squared is positive 36. 8 minus 5 is 3. 3 squared is 9. 9 plus the 36 gets me up to 45. So our radius is the square root of 45. So that means then that the radius squared would not be square root of 45, but just 45. Okay, and then the opposite of my center points go here. So I'd have my center x value is 4, so I'm going to put a -4 here, because that would be the opposite of +4. And then I put the opposite of the y value here, so instead of +8, I put a -8. So there's the equation for a circle that had these given endpoints of the diameter. Again, I just want to emphasize that you could have just as easily, when you figured out your radius, picked 4/8 and -211 instead of the 10/5. You know, just to show you, I'll start over this and show you I'm going to get the same thing, the square root of 45 here. In fact, I'll leave that down there for you to see. Okay, this time when I plug in here, I'm going to use 4 and -2 for my x values and subtract those. Subtract your y values, so 8 minus the 11, square that. Alright, a double negative is plus positive, 4 plus 2 is 6, 6 squared is 36. If you recall correctly, that's the same value I had just a minute ago. 8 minus 11 is -3. -3, when you square it, becomes positive 9. 9 plus 36 is again 45. See? So it doesn't matter whether you choose this endpoint or that endpoint. As long as you use it with the center point, you'll be able to get a correct radius. Alright, well there you have it. That's the hardest they get on this worksheet, is if they give you 2 endpoints of a diameter. Okay, and in that case, remember, you got to find 2 things. You got to find the center first by doing a midpoint, and then use that center and one of the endpoints of the diameter to find a radius using the distance formula. When all is said and done, though, don't forget to plug it all in and write the equation in this format, where this is the opposite of your x value, this is the opposite of your y value at the center I'm talking about, and then this is your radius squared, which is always, the radius squared is always just, when you go to find your radius, would be this value that's underneath the square root. Okay, so again, don't use your calculator's program to do distance formula, because that it'll take the square root and actually round it to a decimal. We don't want that. We want this value underneath the square root here, because that's r squared. All right, if you have any questions or concerns, any problems that give you trouble, don't forget to contact me. You can email me or text me on Remind, and I can even set up a Zoom time with you if you would like me to show you how to do these on my dry erase board. This is the last section, by the way, of this chapter. Okay, so our next lesson will just be a review of the chapter, and then our last lesson will be the actual test for chapter 9. Okay, and that'll be on the 15th. Don't forget that any and all assignments are due on the 21st. Okay, so you're running out of time here. Those of you that are getting behind on your assignments, okay, make sure you get those done. Anything that you try to turn in after the 21st is just going to be zeros. Okay, so I'd hate to see somebody get a low score or even possibly fail the 9 weeks because of that. Okay, so make sure you're diligent about doing your assignments. And show work, please, if you want to get full credit.